A legend of the hack-and-slash genre, spanning 8 games including spin-offs, it is one of video gaming's greatest titles. Today, we honor Golden Axe. I will focus on the first game of the series, comparing the arcade version to the Genesis version. Why these two versions? Besides the Genesis version being the first version of the game I played, I feel there is no need to review every single version, considering some of them are just ports from the Genesis version. Golden Axe came out in 1989 for the arcade and the Sega Genesis. Later it was ported many times to many different formats. Just so you can get an idea of all the things it's been on, here's a list. Arcade, Genesis, Master System, DOS, Amiga, Atari ST, Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, Game Boy Advance, mobile phone, Virtual Console, WonderSwan Color, ZX Spectrum, Xbox Live Arcade, Arcade Legends Sega Genesis Volume 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Dreamcast, PC, and the TurboGrafx CD. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about the story. Yes, there's a story. Death Adder has captured the king and his daughter and has held them captive in their own castle. 3 warriors end up taking on the challenge of saving the kingdom by hacking and slashing their way to a common foe. The first is a dwarf, Gilius Thunderhead, whose twin brother was killed by the soldiers of Death Adder. Another is a barbarian, Axe Battler, looking for the revenge for the murder of his mother. The last is Tyrus Flare, an Amazon whose parents were both killed by Death Adder. So, as you might have already guessed, the name of the game is Revenge, as clearly illustrated at the beginning when your friend Alex gets killed in front of your eyes, or as the Genesis version tells you this in text, which seems a lot less dramatic. Well anyway, who plays these games for the story? Let's get to the gameplay. Golden Axe has the basic attacks of the hack-and-slash genre, as well as some that are seldom seen. It has the attack, the back attack, the jump attack, the dash attack, and the high jump attack. So why am I calling Golden Axe a legend when I'm just listing some of the basic elements of the genre? Well, I'm not finished. One of the best elements is next, and that is the magic. The magic is the real star of the show, as it will decimate the enemies on screen. Before I tell you what magic there is, let me show you how you get it. You see, you hit these little gnome-like guys, and you steal their magic bottles. The more magic bottles you get, the more powerful the magic attack, as indicated at the top of the screen. The dwarf uses lightning magic, which is not that powerful because he relies on more physical attacks. The barbarian uses earth magic, which does a medium amount of damage because he's the designated all-around character. And the Amazon uses fire magic, which is highly effective, especially when she summons a dragon. An interesting element to the game is that there's a bonus round after a level ends. Gnomes show up and steal your magic, if you have any, and you collect health from the green ones and magic from the blue ones. Then after they run away, it's on to the next level. In between levels and after this bonus level, you'll notice that there's a map screen. It will show you where you are, and it'll tell you a little bit about what's going on in between. Another gameplay element that was different from the other games was the inclusion of mountable creatures. There are 2 types of creatures, with one having 2 variations. Let it be known that all creatures can do the headbutt. First we have the fire-breathing dragons. The blue dragon blows fire on the ground ahead of it, while the red dragon shoots fireballs. Then there's the chicken leg, which attacks with its tail, and that's about it. The chicken leg does seem to be paying homage to another game that these guys made, Altered Beast, in which it appears as one of the enemies in the game. Golden Axe also have the ability for 2 players to help, fight, or compete against each other. This feature made both versions of the game a must-play and a definite must-have for the Genesis. Another thing Golden Axe had that separated from the crowd was that the game had a unique grading system. It showed how well a player did in the game judged by how many continues the player used and how far they got. This is a nice feature that allows the player to strive for a higher grade. It looked for self-improvement. This is also nice when competing against a teammate. Because of hardware limitations of the Genesis, developers decided to make up for it with extra content. This content takes one form as 2 extra levels. Originally, the arcade version had 9 stages, and in the Genesis it has 8. I know that this might not make sense, but it's technically longer due to the arcade counting bonus levels. This was to add on after beating Death Adder, saying that there was someone else who was pulling the strings. It ends up being a few more fights in the castle, then you get to the boss, Deathbringer. He basically looks like Death Adder with different colors. If you think this guy will go down as Death Adder, you have another thing coming. This guy is so much harder. Those annoying, nearly invincible skeletons will hassle you, and he has the ability to use magic to wipe out your health quickly. Another addition to the Genesis version was that it had 2 extra modes. One was the beginner mode, which either helps new players begin with an easy difficulty, or it will help give players a confidence boost. This mode is just the first 3 levels with a different boss at the end. Then they have the duel mode, where you can either go against another player, or you can take the endurance challenge of going against different enemies in rounds that get progressively harder. and then being judged on how well you did at the end. The difficulty of any version of the game partly comes from the enemies either ganging up on you, attacking quicker than your attacks, where you're positioned when you get hit down, and /or the enemies being skeletons. The difficulty of the arcade version seems to be easier than the Genesis because of the ability to put in as many coins as you need to keep playing. The enemies seem to have a lot less health in this version than the Genesis, but it comes with a price. You too are more prone to lose health quickly, and you start out with 2 lives instead of the 3 the Genesis version has. Because of it, it seems that I see the ending for the arcade version than I do when I play the Genesis. The Genesis version seems to be more difficult due to the limited amount of continues and the enemies having more health than in the arcade version. The extra levels in the boss also boost the difficulty, making it more of a challenge. One thing that can help you make the game easier is to add extra bars of health in the options menu. One thing that made this game stand out from the other games was the screams of death that would come whenever an enemy was defeated. With this, the arcade version has better quality. There's a lot more sound effects for hits, bodies hitting the ground, people screaming, and so on. The music is pretty good, each version having different quality. The arcade is noticeably better. Here's where we see noticeable changes. The graphics for the arcade are, well, pretty good looking, kind of a pastel look, while the Genesis version has a darker color palette. The arcade seems to have a lot more animations to the characters, and when the civilians come on screen there are many and they have some variation, while the Genesis has few and they're just repeats. The characters and creatures also have pretty good detail, making them look a lot better than the Genesis version. The magic looks pretty good, it's a bit better than the Genesis. Because of the Genesis having some limitations, the axe that the dwarf uses is now gray instead of gold. The enemies' bodies do not stay on the ground after they die. And one other noticeable change is Death Adder's entrance. The arcade version has his body rise out of dead bodies and snakes, while the Genesis version has him coming out of a door, and Deathbringer just sitting in a chair looking bored, which seems better. Even the way he dies looks better in the arcade version than the Genesis. In the arcade version, the axe flies out of his hands and hits him in the chest, and blood gushes out. In the Genesis version, Death Adder just falls to the ground dead, and Deathbringer gets the arcade animation of getting an axe in the chest. No blood though.